My twin brother visited me at the psychiatric facility, his face covered in bruises, when I discovered his abuser was his own son-in-law. I knew exactly what to do. We switched places, and I taught that monster a lesson he will never forget. I am Vince Moretti, 68 years old, and a former Marine. People think I am the crazy one because I have anger issues, but after you hear what they did to my brother Leo, you will agree that sometimes anger is the only appropriate response. Before I tell you how I made a grown man cry for mercy, let me know which city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family traitors deserve everything coming to them. I was smoking a cigarette behind the maintenance shed of the Veterans Affairs facility in Chicago when I saw the silver Bentley pull up. I knew it was my brother Leo. He was the only person who visited me and the only person who could afford a car that cost more than this entire building. But when he stepped out, he did not look like a billionaire real estate mogul. He looked like a broken man. He walked with a limp favoring his left leg, and he wore dark sunglasses even though it was overcast. I tossed my cigarette and walked over to him. The first thing I noticed was how he flinched when I reached out to hug him. Leo took off his glasses, and I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. His left eye was swollen shut, a mix of deep purple and sickly yellow. There was a fresh cut on his cheekbone. I grabbed his shoulders. "Who did this to you, Leo?" I demanded, my voice dropping to that low growl I used to use on new recruits. Leo tried to pull away, his hands trembling. He whispered, "It was nothing, Vince. I just fell down the stairs." I gripped him tighter. "You have not been clumsy a day in your life. Tell me the truth, or I am walking out of here and finding out myself." He started crying right there in the parking lot. A man who built skyscrapers, sobbing like a child. "It is Braden," he said. "My son-in-law. He wanted me to sign over the executive rights to the company. When I refused, he pushed me. He said if I tell anyone, he will stop buying my heart medication." I felt a red haze settle over my vision. Braden Cole. The man Leo had welcomed into his home. The man who married Leo's only daughter, Mallory. I looked at my brother. He was soft. He had always been the soft one, the kind one. I was the hard one, the one the Corps sent to do the dirty work. I looked at his reflection in the car window. Then I looked at mine. We were identical. Same height, same build, same receding hairline. The only difference was my thick gray beard and the fire in my eyes. I made a decision in that second. "Give me your suit," I said. Leo looked confused. "What are you talking about?" I started unbuttoning my faded flannel shirt. I said, "Give me your suit, Leo. You are staying here. The doctors here think I am just a grumpy old man. You can rest. You can sleep. I am going to your house." Leo looked terrified. "Vince, you cannot. Braden is dangerous. He is violent." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Braden is a finance director, Leo. I hunted men in jungles for a living. Let him try being violent with me." We went into the public restroom near the park. I shaved off the beard I had grown for 10 years. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see Vince anymore. I saw Leo. But if you looked closely at the eyes, you could see the predator hiding behind the prey. I put on his $5,000 Italian suit. It fit perfectly. I took his wallet, his keys, and his cane. I looked at my brother one last time. He looked so small in my oversized clothes. "Rest, brother," I told him. "When I come back, your problems will be solved." I walked to the Bentley, trying to imitate Leo's hesitant shuffle, but inside my heart was pounding a war drum. The wolf was entering the sheep pen, and the sheep had no idea what was coming. Driving up to Leo's estate felt like entering a fortress. Iron gates, manicured lawns, and a house big enough to hold an army. But the moment I stepped through the front door, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. The air smelled of expensive lilies and fear. I had barely set the briefcase down when a voice boomed from the living room. "Look who finally decided to drag his carcass home." Braden Cole walked into the foyer. He was 35, tall, handsome in a plastic sort of way, and wearing a white suit that probably cost more than my military pension. He did not say hello. He did not ask about the bruises he had caused. He just walked up to me and snatched the briefcase from my hand. "Did you sign the papers, old man?" I had to use every ounce of my discipline to keep from breaking his nose right there. I lowered my head, making my shoulders slump. I channeled Leo's fear. I need more time, Braden," I stammered, my voice shaky. "I am not feeling well." Braden sneered, his face twisted into a mask of disgust. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You are useless, Leo. Totally useless." Then, without warning, he kicked me hard in the right shin with his dress shoe. Pain shot up my leg. It was sharp and sudden. My instinct was to grab his throat and slam him into the marble floor. My muscles twitched, ready to strike, but I stopped myself. Not yet. The game had just begun. I let out a cry of pain and crumpled to the floor, clutching my ankle. Braden laughed. "Look at you. Pathetic. Get up. And do not think you are getting a gourmet dinner tonight. Kitchen is closed for parasites. You eat what is left." He stepped over me like I was a piece of trash and walked up the grand staircase, whistling. I stayed on the floor for a moment, rubbing my ankle. The physical pain was good. It focused me. It reminded me of exactly why I was here. I looked up at the crystal chandelier hanging above me and promised myself that by the time I was done with Braden Cole, he would wish he had never learned to walk. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the cane. I was not just acting anymore. I was hunting. 2 hours later, I sat at the long mahogany dining table. The contrast was enough to make me sick. At the head of the table sat Braden, savoring a plate of buttered lobster tail and truffle risotto. To his right sat my niece, Mallory. She looked beautiful but tired, her eyes fixed on her plate, refusing to look at me. And in front of me, the maid had placed a bowl of lukewarm, watery oatmeal. It was a power move, a way to show me my place. I picked up the spoon, my hand trembling intentionally. Mallory whispered without looking up, "Dad, just eat it quickly so you can go to bed." Her voice broke my heart. She knew. She knew what her husband was doing to her father, and she said nothing. She was protecting her lifestyle at the cost of her father's dignity. In that moment, I realized she was not a victim. She was an accomplice. Braden swirled his red wine in the glass. He looked at me with a predatory grin. "You know, Leo, I have been thinking. Maybe the master bedroom is too big for you. You have been looking very confused lately. Maybe the basement would be safer. Less stairs for you to fall down." He emphasized the word fall, mocking the lie he had forced Leo to tell. I continued to eat the tasteless gruel, keeping my head down. "I cannot move to the basement, Braden," I said softly. "It is damp down there. My chest." Braden slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Stop whining, God, I am so sick of your voice." He stood up, grabbing the bottle of expensive red wine. He walked over to me. "Here, maybe this will shut you up." He poured the wine into my glass, but he did not stop when it was full. He kept pouring. The dark red liquid overflowed, spilling onto the pristine white tablecloth and dripping onto my hand. It was hot and sticky. "Oops," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. My hand slipped. This was it. The moment to test the waters. I jerked my hand back as if burned, but instead of pulling it into my lap, I flailed outward. My hand struck the full wine glass and sent it flying. The glass arced through the air and shattered against Braden's pristine white suit pants. The dark red stain bloomed instantly across his crotch and thighs, looking like a gunshot wound. The room went silent. Braden looked down at his ruined suit, then up at me. His face turned a shade of purple that matched the bruises on my brother's face. "You stupid, senile old bat!" he screamed. I shrank back in my chair, making myself look as small as possible. "I am sorry," I whined. My hand slipped Braden. "Just like yours." Mallory gasped, covering her mouth. Braden was shaking with rage. He looked like he was about to strike me right there. He reached out and grabbed the bowl of oatmeal in front of me. He hurled it across the room. The bowl smashed against the expensive wallpaper, sending gray slop sliding down the floral pattern. "Clean it up," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You get down on your knees and you clean up every drop, Leo. And if there is a stain left in the morning, you will be sleeping in the garage." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Mallory quickly stood up, mumbling an apology, and ran after him, leaving me alone in the dining room. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. Slowly, I pushed back my chair and walked over to the mess. I knelt down, not because I was obedient, but because I needed to inspect the damage. I picked up a shard of the broken ceramic bowl. It was sharp, razor sharp. I smiled a cold, hard smile that would have terrified Braden if he had seen it. I was not cleaning up a mess. I was analyzing a battlefield. Braden thought he had broken me. He thought he had humiliated me. But all he had done was show me his weaknesses. He had no discipline. He had no control. He was a bully who only felt strong when others were weak. I stood up, ignoring the mess on the wall. I walked to the table and picked up the steak knife Braden had used for his lobster. I tested the edge with my thumb. Dull. But it would do for now. I slipped the knife into the pocket of my jacket. Tonight the wolf would sleep with one eye open. And tomorrow the game of psychological warfare would truly begin. Braden wanted to treat me like a dog. Fine. But he forgot that when you back a dog into a corner, eventually it bites. And I had a very strong bite. I lay in the darkness of the master bedroom, waiting. A Marine never truly sleeps when he is in enemy territory. We learn to rest our eyes while keeping our senses fully alert, tuned to the slightest change in the environment. My brother Leo had described his insomnia to me as a curse, but I knew now that it was not insomnia. It was survival. The digital clock on the bedside table read 2 in the morning. The house was silent, settled into the heavy quiet that only vast, empty mansions seemed to possess. But I was not alone. I had been lying perfectly still for 3 hours, my breathing regulated to a slow, rhythmic pattern that mimicked deep sleep. It was a discipline I had mastered decades ago, lying in muddy trenches while patrols walked just feet away. But this was not a trench. It was a silk-sheeted bed in a room that smelled of lavender and stale air. I heard the floorboard creak in the hallway. It was a faint sound, almost imperceptible, but to me it sounded like a gunshot. Someone was outside the door. I did not move. I did not change my breathing pattern. I kept my eyes closed, trusting my ear sounds to paint the picture. The doorknob turned. It was a slow, deliberate motion designed to be silent. The latch clicked open, and a draft of cool air formed the hallway, snake into the room. Braden Cole was coming to play his nightly game. Leo had told me about these nights. He said he would wake up confused, convinced he had heard voices, or that things in his room had moved. He thought he was losing his mind. He thought he was developing dementia. But now, lying here in the dark, I knew the truth. It was not dementia. It was gaslighting. It was a psychological campaign of terror waged by a man who wanted to inherit a fortune by driving his father-in-law insane. I heard the soft thud of bare feet on the carpet. Braden was moving toward the bed. I could smell him. The lingering scent of expensive scotch and that cloying cologne he wore. He stopped right beside the bed. I could feel his presence looming over me, a dark shape in the shadows. "Leo, wake up," he whispered. His voice was barely a breath, a hiss in the silence. It was the kind of sound that weaves itself into a nightmare. "Leo, you left the stove on again. You are trying to burn the house down, aren't you?" I remained motionless. My heart rate did not spike. My adrenaline was a cold, controlled river. He was trying to plant false memories, trying to make a sleeping man wake up in a panic, believing he was a danger to himself. Braden moved closer. I felt the mattress dip slightly as he leaned over. He reached out toward the nightstand where Leo kept his heart medication and his water. I heard the clink of glass. He was moving things. In the morning, Leo would wake up and find his pills in the bathroom or under the bed, and he would think he had misplaced them. He would doubt his own sanity. "You are useless, old man," Braden hissed. His voice was full of venom. "Everyone is waiting for you to die. Even Mallory. Especially Mallory. She hates having to take care of you. She wants the money, Leo. We all just want the money." It took every ounce of my willpower not to open my eyes and drive my fist into his throat. Hearing him slander my daughter, telling my brother that his own child hated him, was a level of cruelty I had not anticipated. This was not just greed. This was sadism. Braden enjoyed this. He enjoyed the power of whispering poison into the ear of a defenseless man. He reached out toward my face. I felt the air shift. He was going to pinch my nose or shake me awake just enough to disorient me. This was the moment. The predator had gotten too close to the trap. As his hand hovered inches from my face, my hand shot out from under the covers. I did not move like an old man. I moved like a striker snake. My fingers locked around his wrist. I didn't just hold it. I crushed it. My grip strength was something I had maintained religiously over the years, squeezing tension grippers until my forearms burned. I clamped down on the delicate bones of his wrist, finding the pressure points that send pure white-hot agony shooting up the arm. Braden gasped a wet-choked sound of pure shock. He tried to yank his hand back, but I was an anchor. I was immovable. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, but there was enough moonlight filtering through the curtains for him to see the whites of my eyes. I did not blink. I stared straight up at him, locking my gaze onto his terrified face. I did not look like the confused, fearful Leo he was used to tormenting. Braden froze. For a second, his brain could not process what was happening. The sheep had bitten the wolf. "Who are you?" He stammered, his voice trembling. He tried to pull away again, using his other hand to pry at my fingers, but my grip only tightened. I felt the tendons in his wrist shift and pop under the pressure. I did not shout. I did not yell. I lowered my voice to a gravelly rasp, a tone that sounded like gravel grinding together deep in the earth. It was the voice of a nightmare. "I am the thing that lives in the dark, Braden," I whispered. He pulled harder, panic setting in. "Let go. You are crazy. Let go of me. You like to scare old men." I continued, my voice devoid of emotion. "You like to whisper in the dark. You like to make people think they are going mad." I sat up slowly, never releasing his wrist. I pulled him down, bringing his face inches from mine. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. I could smell the fear rolling off him in waves. It was a sour, metallic smell. "I am not the one you should be scaring, Braden. I am the one you should be running from. Because I do not have dementia, and I do not forget." I squeezed harder. This time I heard a distinct crunch. It wasn't a break, but it was close. It was the sound of cartilage being compressed beyond its limit. Braden let out a high-pitched yelp of pain. "Please stop." "You are hurting me," I smiled. It was a slow, terrifying baring of teeth. "Good," I whispered. "Now you know how it feels to be helpless. Now you know that there are monsters under the bed. And tonight, the monster has you." I held him for 3 more seconds, letting the terror soak into his bones. I wanted him to remember this sensation, the feeling of being completely overpowered by the man he thought was weak. Then I released him abruptly. The sudden release sent him stumbling backward. He tripped over his own feet and fell hard onto the carpet, clutching his throbbing wrist to his chest. He scrambled backward on the floor, kicking his legs like a frightened crab, trying to get away from me. "Get out," I said. The command was simple, but it carried the weight of an execution order. Braden scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at me one last time, his eyes wide with confusion and horror. He didn't see Leo anymore. He saw something else, something he couldn't explain, and that terrified him more than any physical threat. He turned and ran. I heard him sprinting down the hallway, his footsteps heavy and chaotic. I heard the door to his bedroom slam shut and the lock click. I sat there in the darkness for a long time, listening to the silence return to the house. But the silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a battlefield after a victory. I looked at my hand, flexed my fingers. They were stiff but strong. I thought about Leo. I thought about how many nights he had lain here trembling, crying silently, believing he was losing his mind, while that coward whispered lies in the dark. My anger was a cold, hard stone in my gut. I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. The soft yellow light flooded the room, banishing the shadows. I picked up the glass of water Braden had moved and placed it back exactly where it belonged. Then I checked the oxygen machine. He had turned the dial down, restricting the flow. If Leo had been sleeping heavily, he might have woken up gasping for air, terrified he was dying. I turned the dial back to the correct setting. This was not just a family dispute. This was attempted murder by slow degrees. Braden wasn't just a bully, he was a killer who didn't have the guts to pull a trigger. He wanted nature to do the work for him, accelerated by fear. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate bathed in moonlight. Tomorrow, the war would escalate. Braden would be nursing a bruised wrist and a bruised ego. He would be paranoid. He would be watching me, trying to figure out if what happened tonight was real or a nightmare. And I would be ready. I went back to bed, but I did not sleep. I lay there with a smile on my face, thinking about the look in Braden's eyes. He had come looking for a ghost, and he had found one. But this ghost had hands of steel and a heart of fire. The haunting of Braden Cole had officially begun. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom, but it brought no warmth to the cold pit in my stomach. It was 6 in the morning. My internal clock, set by decades of military service, woke me up long before the alarm. I sat on the edge of the bed, stretching my stiff muscles. The encounter with Braden last night had been satisfying, but it was only a skirmish. The war was just beginning. I walked over to the nightstand to take Leo's morning medication. The bottle was labeled digoxin, a standard drug for heart failure. The label looked official. It had Leo's name, the doctor's name, and the pharmacy logo. I popped the cap and shook 2 pills into my palm. They were small, white, and round. I frowned. I had served as a field medic for 2 years in the Corps before moving to infantry. I knew what digoxin looked like. It was usually stamped with specific identification numbers. These pills were blank. I raised one to my nose. It smelled faintly of chalk and citrus. I touched the tip of my tongue to it. Sweet. It dissolved instantly, leaving a sugary residue. My blood ran cold. This was not heart medication. This was a sugar pill, or maybe a cheap vitamin C tablet. I poured the rest of the bottle onto the nightstand. Every single one was a fake. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just emotional abuse. Braden was not just trying to scare Leo into an early grave, he was actively pushing him into one. By replacing his heart medication with placebos, he ensured that Leo's heart would slowly weaken. A sudden heart attack would look completely natural for a man of his age and condition. No autopsy would be required. Braden would inherit the empire, and the police would send flowers to the funeral. I swept the fake pills into a tissue and shoved them into my pocket. Evidence. I would add this to the growing pile. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so intense it made my vision blur. I wanted to march into the guest room, drag Braden out of bed, and beat him until he couldn't stand. But that would be too easy. That would be Vince the Marine reacting. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the ghost. I went into the bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. I needed a counterattack. Something immediate. Something that would hurt his ego more than his body. My eyes scanned the rows of expensive creams and colognes until they landed on a blue bottle tucked in the back corner. Magnesium citrate, the liquid kind. I smiled. It was a high-powered saline laxative used to clear out patients before major surgery. It was fast-acting and violent. The bottle was nearly full. I checked the dosage instructions. 1/2 cup for an adult. I grabbed the whole bottle. I walked downstairs to the kitchen. The house was silent. The maid had not arrived yet. I started the coffee machine, a high-end Italian espresso maker that cost more than my first car. The rich aroma of dark roast beans filled the air. I found Braden's favorite mug. It was a custom ceramic piece that said, "The Boss" in gold letters. How fitting. I poured a double shot of strong black coffee into the mug. Then I uncapped the blue bottle. I poured the thick, clear liquid into the coffee. I didn't measure. I just poured until the bottle was light. I stirred it vigorously. The strong bitterness of the espresso would mask the salty chemical taste of the laxative perfectly. I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, confident steps. Braden walked into the kitchen. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked tailored to within an inch of its life. His left wrist was wrapped in an ace bandage. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. He stopped when he saw me. "You are up early," he grunted. He didn't look me in the eye. He moved to the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water, drinking it greedily. His throat was dry from fear. I decided to play the role of the contrite father-in-law. I turned around, holding the mug with both hands. "I made you coffee, Braden," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to apologize for last night. I had a nightmare. I didn't mean to grab you." I was confused. Braden lowered the water bottle. He looked at me suspiciously. Then his ego took over. Of course it was a nightmare. He couldn't accept that the old man had actually overpowered him. He needed to believe I was just senile and lucky. "You are damn right you were confused," he snapped, walking over to me. "You nearly broke my wrist, old man. If you ever touch me again, I will put you in a home so fast your head will spin." He snatched the mug from my hands. The Boss shone in the morning light. I lowered my head. It won't happen again. I just want to help. Braden sniffed the coffee. He took a small sip. He grimaced slightly, but then took a larger gulp. The caffeine was what he needed. "This tastes bitter," he complained. "I made it strong," I said. "Just how you like it. For your big meeting." Braden smirked. "That is right. I have the board meeting at 9. I am firing 3 of your loyalists today, Leo. Clearing out the dead wood. By noon, this company will be fully under my control. You should be grateful I am doing the work you are too weak to do." He drained the cup, every last drop. He slammed the mug down on the counter. "Don't wait up, we are celebrating tonight." He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out the back door toward the garage. I watched through the window as he got into his Porsche. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. I looked at the empty mug and the empty laxative bottle. Braden Cole was about to have the most memorable meeting of his life. I spent the next 2 hours sitting in the living room reading the newspaper. Mallory came down around 8. She looked pale. She didn't ask about the coffee. She didn't ask about her husband's wrist. She poured herself a glass of juice and went back upstairs. She was a ghost in her own home, haunting the hallways but never engaging. At 9:30, my phone buzzed. It was a text message, but not on my phone. It was on Leo's phone, which I had kept. It was from his executive assistant, Sarah. She was one of the few people Leo trusted. I had texted her earlier saying I was sick, but to keep me updated on the meeting. The text was short. Mr. Moretti. Emergency at the office. Board meeting cancelled. I smiled. I typed back. What happened, Sarah? Be specific. 3 dots danced on the screen. Then the reply came. It was awful. Mr. Cole was in the middle of his presentation. He started sweating profusely. He tried to keep talking, but he turned white. Then, he couldn't leave the room in time. It happened right at the head of the conference table, in front of the investors from Tokyo. The paramedics were called because they thought he was having a seizure, but it was just a mess. A terrible mess. He was carried out on a stretcher, but everyone saw. The smell was unbearable. The investors walked out. I put the phone down on the coffee table and leaned back in the leather armchair. I laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that came from the belly. I could picture it perfectly. The arrogant finance director in his charcoal suit standing before the most important people in the industry, feeling his insides turn to water. The panic. The loss of control. The absolute destruction of his dignity. Braden cared about image more than anything. He spent thousands on suits, hours in front of the mirror. Today, he had soiled himself like an infant in front of the people he needed to impress. The story would spread like wildfire. Wall Street loved a rumor, but they loved a humiliation even more. By lunchtime, he would be a laughingstock. But the victory was shadowed by the weight of the pill bottle in my pocket. The laxative was a prank. The fake heart medication was a crime. I heard the front door open. It was too early for Braden to be back. I turned to see 2 men in blue jumpsuits walking in carrying toolboxes. They looked confused, finding me sitting there calmly. Mr. Cole sent us, one of them said. He called from the, hospital. Said we need to change the locks on the study and install a camera in the hallway. I stood up. My laughter died instantly. Braden was not defeated. He was wounded, and a wounded animal lashes out. He knew something was wrong. He couldn't process that I had poisoned him, so his paranoia was shifting to security. He wanted to lock me out. He wanted to watch me. I gripped the handle of Leo's cane. Go home, boys, I said, my voice low and dangerous. The workmen blinked. Excuse me. Mr. Cole paid us extra for emergency service. I walked toward them. I didn't limp. I didn't shuffle. I moved with the heavy, aggressive gait of a man looking for a fight. I said, go home, unless you want to explain to the police why you are trespassing. The men looked at each other, then at me. They saw something in my eyes that didn't match the cardigan and the cane. They saw the Marine. They picked up their boxes and backed out the door. I locked it behind them. The game had shifted. Braden knew he was under attack even if he didn't know the source. He would come back angry. He would come back humiliated. And he would be looking for someone to punish. I went to the kitchen and took the largest, sharpest knife from the block. I didn't put it in my pocket. I taped it under the dining room table. Then I went to the pantry and found a small, portable toolbox. It was time for the next phase. If Braden wanted to install cameras, he was welcome to try. But he was about to discover that his own house had turned against him. The pills in my pocket were proof of his intent to kill. The coffee was my warning shot. Now it was time for open warfare. The doorbell rang at 2 in the afternoon, shattering the tense silence that had gripped the house since Braden returned from his disastrous board meeting. He had spent the last 3 hours locked in his office, likely shredding documents or screaming at his subordinates over the phone. When the chimes echoed through the hallway, I saw Braden emerge. He had changed into a fresh suit, but he could not change the frantic energy that radiated off him. He looked like a man trying to hold back a landslide with his bare hands. I sat in the library pretending to read a book on architectural history, but my eyes were fixed on the reflection in the glass cabinet doors. I watched as Braden marched to the front door and ripped it open. Standing on the porch was Saul Goldman. Saul was a legend in Chicago legal circles. He was 70 years old, short-bald, and wore glasses thick enough to see into the future. But do not let his appearance fool you. He was a shark. He had been my brother Leo's attorney for 40 years. He knew where every body was buried, and he had dug half the graves himself. Braden blocked the doorway, his body language aggressive and territorial. "What do you want?" Saul Braden barked, skipping the pleasantries. "Leo is not seeing visitors today. He is unwell." Saul didn't blink. He adjusted his heavy briefcase and looked up at Braden with the bored expression of a man who deals with predators for a living. "I am not a visitor, Braden. I am his legal counsel, and I do not need your permission to see my client. I have documents that require his immediate signature regarding the estate trust." Braden laughed, a harsh, nervous sound. "The trust is being restructured, Saul. I am handling it now. Leo gave me power of attorney verbally last week. You can leave the papers with me. I will make sure he signs them when he is lucid. Right now he is confused. He barely knows what day it is." I listened from the library, feeling the anger rise in my chest. Braden was lying so easily, so fluently. He was trying to cut Leo off from his last line of defense. I stood up. It was time to intervene. I walked out of the library, leaning heavily on my cane but moving with purpose. I kept my face neutral, my eyes slightly vacant, maintaining the charade, but I projected my voice clearly across the foyer. "Let him in, Braden." Braden spun around, shocked. He hadn't heard me approach. For a second, I saw the fear in his eyes, the memory of my grip on his wrist last night, and the humiliation of this morning, but he quickly masked it with annoyance. "Leo, go back to your room," Braden snapped. "You are not well. I was just telling Saul that you need rest." I ignored him. I walked past him and extended a hand to the lawyer. "Hello, Saul. Thank you for coming." Saul looked at me. He had known Leo since college. He studied my face, searching for signs of the dementia Braden claimed I had. He saw the bruises that were fading under makeup. He saw the way I stood. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Hello, Leo," Saul said carefully. "We need to talk." "Alone?" Braden stepped between us. "Absolutely not. As his primary caretaker, I need to be present for any legal discussions. Leo is liable to sign away the house for a magic bean if I am not watching him." I looked at Braden. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just channeled 40 years of command experience into a single look. It was the look I used on fresh lieutenants who thought they knew better than a seasoned sergeant. "Braden," I said, my voice low and steady. "Go to your office. Fix the mess you made at the board meeting. Let me talk to my lawyer. Or do you want me to ask Saul to launch an audit into the company finances right now?" The color drained from Braden's face. The threat of an audit was his kryptonite, especially with the gambling debts I knew he had. He clenched his jaw, his fists balling up at his sides. He looked from me to Saul, realizing he was outmaneuvered. "Fine," he spat. "You have 10 minutes. Then I am coming in to check on you." "Don't believe a word he says, Saul. He is delusional." Braden stormed off toward the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. I gestured for Saul to follow me into the library. I closed the heavy oak doors and locked them. I turned to face the lawyer. Saul dropped his briefcase on the desk and looked at me. He didn't speak for a long moment. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "You are not Leo," he said softly. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had shown in 2 days. "You always were sharp, Saul. Leo walks on the balls of his feet because of his flat arches. You walk on your heels. And Leo would never have threatened an audit. He would have offered Braden a cup of tea." I walked over to the desk and poured 2 glasses of scotch. I handed one to him. "I am Vince." Saul took the glass, his hand steady. "Vince. The Marine. The one everyone says is crazy." That is the one I took a sip of the amber liquid, feeling the burn. Leo is safe. He is at the VA facility. We switched. I am here to clean house Saul, and I need your help. Saul took a long drink. He looked at the locked door, then back at me. A slow grin spread across his face. I never liked that son of a bitch, Braden. He treats your brother like an ATM machine. But I couldn't do anything because Leo wouldn't let me. He is too soft. He is not soft, I corrected. He is kind. And kindness is a liability when you are living with a viper. Saul nodded. What is the plan, Vince? Because if Braden finds out who you are, he will call the police and have you arrested for fraud and trespassing. Let him try, I said. But before that happens, I need evidence. I know he is abusing Leo. I know he is stealing money. And I know he is trying to kill him with fake medication. I showed Saul the pills I had pocketed earlier. Saul's face turned grim. He picked up one of the pills, examining it. This is serious. This is attempted murder. We need proof that will stand up in court. Hearsay and a few pills won't be enough. He will claim Leo swapped them himself in a fit of dementia. I reached into the bookshelf and pulled out a hollowed-out book. I need eyes, Saul. I need to see everything he does when he thinks he is alone. I need to record him admitting what he has done. Saul opened his briefcase. He reached into a hidden compartment and pulled out a small black box. Inside were 4 devices that looked like common screws. These are pinhole cameras, Saul explained. High-definition audio and video, night vision capable. They transmit directly to a cloud server that only I can access. I use them for corporate espionage cases usually, but they will work for a domestic rat. Perfect, I said. We spent the next 10 minutes working with the precision of a special ops team. I showed Saul where I wanted them. One in the master bedroom, in the master. One in Braden's office aimed at his safe. One in the living room, and one right here in the library. Saul handed me the tiny devices. You have to install them, Vince. You have the access. Put them in the smoke detectors or the air vents. Somewhere high, somewhere permanent. I pocketed the cameras. Consider it done. Suddenly, the doorknob rattled violently. Time is up, Braden's voice came through the wood, muffled but angry. Open the door. I looked at Saul. We had an understanding. An alliance formed in the trenches of a legal war. Saul finished his scotch in one gulp. Go get him, Marine. I unlocked the door and opened it. I instantly slumped my shoulders, letting my mouth hang open slightly, reverting to the confused old man. Braden pushed past me, eyeing Saul suspiciously. What were you talking about? Why was the door locked? I looked at Braden, blinking rapidly. We were talking about the boat, Braden. I want to buy a boat. Braden rolled his eyes. You don't sail, Leo. You get seasick in the bathtub. See Saul. I told you. He is losing it. Saul picked up his briefcase. He looked at Braden with a mixture of pity and contempt. I will draw up the papers for the boat, Leo. Good day, Braden. Try not to have any more accidents at the office. I hear dry cleaning bills can be expensive. Saul walked out, leaving Braden fuming in the hallway. I turned and shuffled toward the stairs, clutching the tiny cameras in my pocket like grenades. Braden watched me go, his eyes burning into my back. Where are you going? He demanded. To take a nap, I mumbled. All this talk made me tired. I made it to the landing before looking back. Braden was pulling his phone out, dialing a number furiously. I knew who he was calling. The loan sharks. He needed money, and his plan to take over the company had just hit a speed bump. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I didn't nap. I dragged a chair to the center of the room and climbed up to the smoke detector. Installation began immediately. By nightfall, the house would no longer be Braden's private torture chamber. It would be a reality TV show starring a villain who didn't know the cameras were rolling. Every threat, every lie, every moment of cruelty would be captured, stored, and prepared for the grand finale. I finished the installation in the bedroom and moved to the hallway. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was reconnaissance. This was gathering intelligence. As I placed the second camera in the vent overlooking the living room, I heard Braden downstairs screaming into his phone. "I need more time. The old man is still breathing. I can't just suffocate him with a pillow, can I? It has to look natural." I froze my finger, pressing the tiny camera into place. "Got you," I whispered. The camera blinked once, a tiny red light that vanished instantly. The recording had started. Braden Cole had just signed his own death warrant, and he didn't even know the ink was dry. I climbed down from the chair and sat on the floor, waiting for the sun to go down. The shadows were my friends now, and tonight they would be watching. The ride to the Moretti Holdings headquarters was silent, but it was the silence of a bomb counting down. Braden drove his Porsche with aggressive, jerky movements, accelerating too hard at green lights and braking at the last possible second. He was trying to unsettle me, trying to make the old man motion sick or anxious. I just stared out the window, watching the Chicago skyline draw closer. I had not been to my brother's company in 20 years. To me it was just a glass tower, but to Leo it was his life's work. And sitting next to me was the man trying to steal it with a fountain pen and a smile. We pulled into the executive parking garage. Braden didn't open my door. He grabbed his briefcase and marched toward the elevator, expecting me to shuffle behind him like an obedient dog. I took my time. I adjusted my jacket, checked my reflection in the car window, and followed. I needed to be slow. I needed to be the anchor that dragged him down. When the elevator doors opened onto the penthouse floor, the atmosphere changed instantly. The receptionists, the junior analysts, the security guards, they all froze when they saw us. But they weren't looking at Braden. They were looking at me. "Good morning, Mr. Moretti," the receptionist said, her voice filled with genuine warmth and concern. "It is so good to see you. We heard you were taking a sabbatical." I smiled a weak, tired smile. "Thank you, Julia. It is good to be back." Braden stepped in front of me, cutting off the moment. "He is not back, Julia. He is just here to sign some papers. He will be gone in an hour. Hold all my calls, and get Sarah to bring the notary to the conference room, now." He guided me down the hallway, his hand gripping my elbow hard enough to bruise. He was parading his prisoner. He wanted the staff to see that the great Leo Moretti was frail, guided by his strong, capable son-in-law. But I saw the looks on their faces. They didn't see a leader in Braden. They saw a usurper. They saw a man they despised. We entered the main conference room. It was a massive space with a table long enough to land a plane on. At the far end sat Sarah, Leo's executive assistant, and a nervous-looking man with a notary stamp. Sarah was a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and loyal. When she saw me, she stood up immediately. Her eyes darted to Braden's hand on my arm, and her lips thinned. "Mr. Moretti," she said softly, "can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" Braden answered for me. "He is fine, Sarah. We just need the signature on the transfer of operational authority. The sooner he signs, the sooner he can go home and rest. He's having a bad day." Braden pulled out a chair for me. It wasn't an offer of comfort, it was a command. "Sit." I sat. On the table lay a stack of documents, 3 inches thick. They were bound in blue leather folders. The transfer papers. The death warrant for Leo's legacy. Braden opened the folder to the last page. He uncapped a heavy gold pen and placed it in my hand. "Right here, Leo," he said, tapping the X at the bottom of the page. "Just sign your name. I have already explained everything to you at the house. This just lets me handle the boring day-to-day stuff so you don't have to worry about it." The notary watched me, his pen hovering over his logbook. Sarah watched me, her hands clasped tightly together as if she were praying. I looked at the signature line. Then I looked at the rest of the page. Then I did something Braden didn't expect. I turned the page back. Braden sighed loudly. "Leo, what are you doing?" "I am reading, Braden," I mumbled. "I want to read." "You can't read this legalese," he snapped. "You will just get confused. It is standard boilerplate. Just sign the damn paper so we can go." I ignored him. I flipped back another page, then another. I wasn't reading the words, I was looking at the numbers attached to the appendices in the back. My eyes scanned the columns of figures. I may not be a corporate genius like Leo, but I know numbers. I know logistics. In the Marines, I was responsible for supply chains worth millions. I knew how much a bullet cost, how much a tank of gas cost, and how to spot when a supplier was padding the bill. My eyes stopped on a line item in the quarterly projection. Consulting fees, Apex Solutions, $300,000. I flipped forward 2 pages. Retainer fee, Apex Solutions, $200,000. I looked up at Sarah. "Sarah," I said, my voice raspy but clear. "Who are Apex Solutions?" The room went deadly silent. Braden froze. Sarah blinked, surprised by the question. I don't know, sir. I have never seen an invoice from them. Braden handles the vendor accounts personally now." I turned my gaze to Braden. He was sweating. A single bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. "It is a new marketing firm, Leo," he said quickly, too quickly. "They are rebranding us. It is complicated digital stuff. You wouldn't understand." I looked back at the document. I pulled a calculator from my pocket. It was an old cheap thing I had brought from the VA. I started punching in numbers. Braden laughed nervously. "What is he doing?" "He is playing with a calculator." "This is ridiculous." "Just sign the paper, Leo." 300,000 plus 200,000, I muttered. "That is $500,000, Braden. For marketing." "But last month you fired the entire marketing department to save money." I looked up at him. My eyes were not cloudy. They were sharp. "Why are we paying $500,000 to a company that Sarah has never heard of, Braden? And why is the address for this company listed as a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands?" Braden's face turned a violent shade of red. "Give me that." He tried to snatch the paper away, but I slammed my hand down on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I am not finished," I shouted. The notary jumped. Sarah gasped. Braden recoiled as if I had slapped him. I flipped to the next section. Vehicle maintenance. $80,000. I looked at Braden. "We don't have a fleet of trucks, Braden. We are a real estate holding company. What vehicles are we maintaining for $80,000 a month? Or is that the payment on your Porsche and the boat you told Saul you didn't have?" Braden was shaking. He looked at the notary, then at Sarah. "Get out." "Everyone get out!" "No," I barked. "Sarah, stay." Sarah stood her ground, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I stood up. I didn't need the cane. I leaned over the table, using my height to intimidate him. "This isn't a transfer of authority, Braden," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. "This is a robbery. You are bleeding this company dry. You are funneling money into shell companies to pay off your debts. Do you think I am stupid? Do you think because I am old, I can't see a thief when he is standing right in front of me?" I picked up the heavy gold pen. Braden watched me, thinking I might attack him with it. Instead, I held up the document, the one he needed signed so desperately, and I tore it in half. Then I tore it again, and again, until the transfer of authority was nothing but confetti on the mahogany table. "I am not signing anything," I said, "and tomorrow I want a full audit of every vendor account from the last 6 months. If I find $1 out of place, Braden, I will fire you so hard you will bounce. Braden stood there trembling with rage. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He was humiliated, completely and utterly undressed in front of his subordinate and a legal witness. He looked at Sarah, who was looking at him with open disgust. He looked at the torn papers. Then he looked at me. The fear in his eyes was gone, replaced by something much darker, something cold and final. He realized that the game had changed. I wasn't just a nuisance anymore. I wasn't just a stubborn old man he could bully. I was a threat, a loose end. As long as I was alive, as long as I had a voice, he was in danger of losing everything. Prison wasn't just a possibility, now it was a probability. Braden straightened his jacket. He forced a smile onto his face, but it looked like a rictus of pain. "Fine, Leo," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We will do it your way. We will have the audit. Let's go home. You look tired." He didn't argue. He didn't scream. That terrified me more than any outburst. We walked to the elevator in silence. Sarah whispered thank you as I passed, but I didn't acknowledge her. I was focused on the man beside me. In the reflection of the elevator doors, I watched him. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking at the back of my neck. I knew that look. I had seen it in the eyes of enemies in the jungle just before they pulled the pin on a grenade. It was the look of a man who had run out of options. He wasn't thinking about the audit. He wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about how to make sure I never made it to that audit tomorrow. Braden Cole had just decided to kill me. The elevator chimed and we stepped out into the garage. The shadows seemed longer, the air colder. I gripped my cane not for support, but as a weapon. "Get in the car," Leo Braden said, opening the door for me. I got in. As he walked around to the driver's side, I saw him pause. He took a deep breath and checked his watch. He was calculating. He was planning. The drive home would be dangerous, but the night that followed would be deadly. I touched the pocket where I kept the fake pills. I had humiliated the devil in his own church. Now I had to survive his wrath. The drive back from the office was a blur of tension, but Braden did not say a word. He dropped me off at the front door and immediately sped away, tires screeching against the pavement. He claimed he had an urgent meeting with a client, but I knew better. He was going to meet with his loan sharks, or perhaps his lawyer trying to find a way to bury me before the audit began tomorrow morning. His absence gave me a window of opportunity, a small window to handle the most painful part of this mission. I needed to deal with Mallory. I found her in the sunroom at the back of the house. It was a beautiful glass-walled space filled with exotic orchids that Leo loved to cultivate, but the beauty was wasted on her. Mallory was sitting on a white wicker sofa staring blankly into the garden. A bottle of expensive Chardonnay sat on the table next to her half empty. It was only 2 in the afternoon. I stood in the doorway for a moment watching her. She looked so much like her mother Leo's late wife. She had the same dark hair, the same delicate features, but where her mother had been warm and resilient, Mallory looked brittle. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been glued back together too many times. This was the girl Leo had carried on his shoulders, the girl he had put through the best schools, the girl he adored more than life itself. And she was the girl who sat silently at the dinner table while her husband poured wine on her father's hands. I had to know. I had to know if there was anything left of my brother's daughter inside that shell of designer clothes and jewelry, or if she was truly gone. I walked into the room, my cane tapping softly on the tile floor. Mallory didn't look up. She took a long sip of wine, her hand trembling slightly. "Daddy," she said, her voice flat. Braden called. "He said you caused a scene at the office. He said you embarrassed him in front of the staff." I sat down opposite her. I didn't slump my shoulders this time. I sat upright. He was stealing Mallory, I said simply. He is funneling millions of dollars out of the company. He is bankrupting us. Mallory sighed, a long, weary sound that grated on my nerves. She swirled the wine in her glass, staring at the golden liquid, as if it held the answers to the universe. So what, she whispered. The two words hit me harder than Braden's kick had. So what? I leaned forward. Mallory, this is your inheritance. This is the legacy your grandfather built. Your husband is destroying it to pay for his gambling debts. And he is hurting me. You saw what happened last night. You see the bruises on my face. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and glassy. There was no shock in them, no outrage, only a deep, exhausting resignation. I know, she said. I know about the gambling. I know about the debts and the abuse I pressed. You know he hurts me. You know he is switching my medication. Mallory flinched. She looked away, her gaze drifting back to the garden. I didn't know about the medication, she mumbled. But I know he can be rough. He has a temper, Dad. You know that. You just need to stop provoking him. Just sign the papers and let him handle things. If you give him what he wants, he will calm down. He promised. I felt a cold fire spreading through my chest. She was bargaining with my life. She was willing to let her father fade away into a medicated fog just to keep the peace. Why do you stay with him? Mallory, I asked. My voice was gentle, but underneath it was steel. Why do you protect a man who treats your father like a dog and treats you like a trophy? She laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. Because, Dad, look around you. Look at this house, look at my clothes, look at the life we live. I am 32 years old, and I have never worked a day in my life. Braden takes care of everything. If I leave him, what do I have? Half of a bankrupt company, a scandal. I can't be poor, Dad. I can't be alone. I stared at her. This was the rot. This was the infection. Leo's kindness had spoiled her. He had protected her so much that she had never learned to stand on her own 2 feet. She was terrified of the world, so she clung to the monster who fed her. There is something else, isn't there? I said. It is not just the money. Mallory took a large gulp of wine, emptying the glass. She poured another, her hands shaking so badly the bottle clinked against the rim. He has a girlfriend, she blurted out. I didn't blink. I had suspected it. The Apex Solutions shell company was likely funding a mistress or a second life. Her name is Tiffany, she continued, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She is 22. She is an Instagram model. He bought her a condo in the city. He bought her a car with the company money. And you tolerate this? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Mallory wiped her face, aggressively smearing her mascara. What choice do I have? If I divorce him, he threatened to release things. Photos, videos. He said he would humiliate me. He said he would make sure I never show my face in society again. So we made a deal. I let him do what he wants. I let him have the company. And in exchange, he keeps me as his wife. He keeps buying me nice things. And we pretend. We just pretend everything is perfect. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Please, Dad. Just sign the papers. Let him have the company. Who cares about the money? If you sign, he will be happy. He will treat us better. We can go back to how it was. We can just exist. Please don't fight him anymore. I can't take the fighting. I looked at the woman sitting in front of me. I looked for my niece. I looked for the little girl who used to run into my arms when I visited before the war. But she wasn't there. Mallory had made her choice. She had sold her soul, not for love, but for comfort. She had sold her father for a pair of diamond earrings and a country club membership. She was willing to let me die, let Leo die just to avoid a scandal. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a collaborator. She was just as guilty as Braden. I stood up slowly. The air in the sunroom felt stifling hot and suffocating. I looked down at her. One last time. "Mallory," I said, "you are asking me to commit suicide so you can keep your country club membership." She sobbed into her hands. "It is not like that. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, coldness seeping into every word. "You are a coward. Your mother would be ashamed of you." Mallory gasped, her head snapping up. "Don't you dare bring Mom into this." I walked toward the door. "I am done talking, Mallory. You made your deal with the devil. Now you have to live with it. But hear me clearly. I am not signing anything, and I am not dying for your comfort." "Dad, wait," she screamed, standing up, knocking her wineglass over. It shattered on the floor, shards of glass mixing with the pale liquid. I didn't turn back. I walked out of the sunroom and into the hallway. My heart was heavy. It felt like a stone in my chest. I had lost family members in the war. I had buried friends. But mourning the living is a different kind of pain. It is a sharp, hollow ache that never really goes away. In my mind, I took a mental red pen and crossed Mallory's name off the list of people I was here to save. She was on the other side of the line now. She was standing with Braden, and when the hammer fell, it would fall on her too. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. The Marine in me had taken over completely. Emotions were a liability. Mallory was a hostile combatant. I heard the front door open. Braden was back. I checked my watch. He had been gone for 2 hours. Enough time to panic. Enough time to make a desperate plan. He walked into the kitchen. He looked disheveled. His tie was loosened and his hair was messy. He smelled of sweat and desperation. He saw me standing there and stopped. "Where is Mallory?" he asked, his voice tight. "In the sunroom," I said. "Drunk," Braden sneered. "Useless cow." He walked past me, bumping my shoulder intentionally. "I am going to my office. Stay out of my way, old man." I watched him go. I waited until I heard the door to his study slam shut. Then I pulled out my phone. I opened the app that connected to the cameras Saul and I had installed. The feed from the study flickered to life on my screen. Braden was pacing back and forth. He was talking to himself, muttering like a madman. He went to the wall safe hidden behind a painting of a hunt scene. He spun the dial. I zoomed in on the screen. He pulled out a small black velvet pouch. He opened it and dumped the contents onto his desk. Diamonds. Loose, uncut diamonds. But that wasn't what caught my eye. He reached back into the safe and pulled out a gun. A snub-nosed .38 special. He checked the cylinder. It was loaded. He put the gun in his waistband and the diamonds in his pocket. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number. The audio from the camera was crystal clear. "It is me," Braden said into the phone. "It is done. I am going to do it tonight. No more accidents. I am going to stage a robbery. A break-in gone wrong. The old man fights back. Bang. It is clean. I will have the money by morning." I closed the app and slipped the phone into my pocket. My heart wasn't racing. My breathing didn't change. I felt a strange sense of calm. The time for games was over. The time for humiliation was over. Braden wasn't just a thief or an abuser anymore. He was an active shooter. He had just declared his intent to execute me within the next few hours. I needed to move. I needed to prepare the kill zone. I walked to the pantry and opened the small toolbox I had hidden there earlier. I took out a roll of heavy-duty duct tape and a coil of high-test fishing line. If Braden wanted a break-in gone wrong, I would give him one. But he was going to be the one who ended up broken. I looked toward the sunroom where Mallory was still crying over her spilled wine. She had chosen her side. She had chosen the man with the gun. Goodbye, daughter. I whispered to the empty kitchen. Then I went to work. The sun was setting and the house was about to become a war zone. And unlike Braden, I had been fighting wars since before he was born. The house was silent, but it was the deceptive silence of a loaded weapon waiting for the trigger to be pulled. Braden was holed up in his study and Mallory was passed out in the sunroom. This was my window. I needed more than just a video of him taking a gun. I needed the motive. I needed the paper trail that would link him to the criminal underworld and ensure that when the police arrived, they wouldn't just arrest him for assault. They would bury him under a mountain of federal charges. I waited until I heard Braden leave the study. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and his footsteps receded down the hallway toward the master bedroom. He was likely going to shower or change before his planned robbery took place. I moved out of the shadows of the kitchen. I didn't use the cane. I moved with the silent predatory grace that the Marine Corps had drilled into my bones 40 years ago. The door to the study was locked. Amateur. I pulled a small tension wrench and a rake pick from my pocket. I had fashioned them earlier from a stiff paper clip and a discarded wiper blade I found in the garage. I knelt before the lock. It was a standard 5-pin tumbler, expensive but simple. I applied tension to the cylinder and raked the pins. 1 click, 2 clicks. The cylinder turned with a satisfying snap. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me, leaving it unlocked so I wouldn't make noise later. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and fear. I went straight to the painting of the English fox hunt on the far wall. I knew from the camera feed exactly what lay behind it. I swung the frame aside, revealing the cold steel face of a wall safe. I didn't need a stethoscope or a drill. I had watched Braden input the combination on the hidden camera feed less than an hour ago. My memory was a steel trap. Left to 32. Right to 10. Left to 55. I spun the dial, my fingers sensitive to the vibrations of the tumblers lining up. The mechanism clunked and the handle turned. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside lay the black velvet bag of diamonds and the gun, but I ignored them. I reached for the stack of leather-bound ledgers at the bottom. I flipped them open under the glow of my small penlight. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just gambling debts. It was a massacre of assets. Braden hadn't just lost money, he had leveraged everything. There were promissory notes signed in blood, or at least in ink, that carried the weight of blood. $5 million owed to the Petrovic Syndicate, a notorious Eastern European crime ring operating out of Chicago. I turned the page. There was a payment schedule. Missed payment. Missed payment. Final warning. The date on the final warning was yesterday. The note at the bottom was written in a jagged, aggressive hand. Payment in full or we take the wife. I stared at the words. This explained everything. The desperation, the attempted murder of Leo, the willingness to sell out Mallory. Braden wasn't just trying to get rich. He was trying to buy his life back. He was going to sacrifice Leo to pay the mob, and if that didn't work, he was going to hand over my niece as collateral. I pulled out my phone and began photographing every page. The interest rates were astronomical. The threats were explicit. This was the smoking gun. This proved that Braden had a $5 million motive to see Leo dead tonight. Suddenly, headlights swept across the closed curtains. I froze. The distinct throaty growl of the Porsche engine rumbled in the driveway. Braden was back, but he hadn't left the house. I had heard him go upstairs. I realized with a jolt of adrenaline that I had miscalculated. The footsteps I heard earlier weren't Braden going upstairs. They were Braden going out the front door to move the car. He was positioning it for a quick getaway or perhaps signaling someone. I heard the front door open. Heavy, frantic footsteps echoed on the marble foyer. He wasn't going upstairs this time. He was coming straight for the study. I looked at the open safe. I looked at the papers scattered on the desk. I had 10 seconds. I shoved the ledgers back into the safe. I threw the velvet bag in after them. I swung the heavy steel door shut and spun the dial, locking it. I swung the painting back into place just as the doorknob began to turn. There was no time to get to the door, no time to get to the window. I dropped to the floor and rolled under the massive mahogany desk. It was an antique piece carved from solid wood with a solid back panel that faced the room. It was a tight squeeze for a man of my size, but I curled my body into a fetal position, pulling my knees to my chest and controlling my breathing. The door swung open. Braden stormed into the room. I could see his expensive Italian loafers from the small gap beneath the desk's front panel. He was pacing back and forth, his steps erratic and heavy. He was muttering to himself, a stream of profanity and panic. "Where is it? Where is it?" he hissed. He walked to the desk. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, powerful rhythm that I prayed he couldn't hear in the silence of the room. He slammed something down on the leather desktop right above my head. The vibration rattled my teeth. He sat down in the chair. The leather groaned under his weight. He was inches from me. If he stretched his legs, if he dropped a pen, if he bent down to tie his shoe, I was dead. I had no weapon. I was trapped in a wooden box with a desperate man who was armed with a .38 special. I held my breath. I focused on a spot on the carpet, a single piece of lint, and poured all my concentration into being invisible. This was the most dangerous game of hide-and-seek I had played since Vietnam. Braden's phone rang. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the quiet room. He answered it on speaker. "Yeah, I am here," he said, his voice trembling. A voice answered him. It was deep, heavily accented, and cold as a Siberian winter. "Time is up, Mr. Cole. The sun has set. Do you have our money?" Braden leaned forward, his elbows digging into the desk. "I am getting it tonight. I swear. The old man, he is going to have an accident. A robbery. I will have the insurance payout and the liquid assets by morning. Just give me 12 hours. "We do not give hours, Mr. Cole," the voice said. "We take fingers. If the money is not in the account by 9 a.m. tomorrow, we will come for the girl, and she will wish she was dead before we are done with her." The call ended. Braden let out a scream of frustration and slammed his fists onto the desk. He was unraveling. The pressure was crushing him. He stood up abruptly, sending the chair rolling back. It hit the bookshelf with a thud. "I have to do it now," he whispered. "I have to do it now." He walked around the desk. I tensed my muscles, ready to spring. If he saw me, I would have to fight him in this confined space. I would have to break his neck before he could draw the gun. It would be messy. It would ruin the plan. But I would not let him kill me. He stopped at the side of the desk. His shoes were 6 inches from my face. I could smell the leather polish. I could see the fine stitching on the hem of his trousers. He paused. He seemed to be looking at something on the floor. My heart stopped. Had I left a footprint? Was a piece of my flannel shirt sticking out? Then he reached down. My hand formed a fist. I prepared to strike his knee to shatter the cap and bring him down, but he didn't reach for me. He reached for the wastebasket next to the desk. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, looked at it, and threw it back in. Paranoid, I thought. He is checking for anything he might have left behind. He turned and walked toward the door. "I am coming for you, Leo," he said to the empty room. He turned off the lights and closed the door. I lay there in the darkness for a full minute, counting to 60 in my head. My body was cramped, my muscles screaming from the tension, but I didn't move. I needed to be sure. Finally, I slid out from under the desk. I stood up and stretched my back, my joints popping softly. I was covered in a cold sweat. That had been too close, but I had what I needed. I had the photos on my phone. and I had heard the conversation. I knew the timeline. Braden wasn't waiting until the middle of the night. He was coming now. I went to the window and looked out. The moon was rising, casting long shadows across the lawn. The estate looked peaceful, but I knew better. Inside these walls, a war was about to reach its bloody conclusion. I checked the time. It was 7:30. I had to get into position. I had to set the stage. Braden was coming to stage a robbery, but he was going to walk into an ambush. I slipped out of the study, locking the door behind me with the pick. I moved through the shadows of the hallway, heading for the kitchen where I had stashed my supplies. The hunter was back on the prowl. And this time the trap was baited with $5 million of debt and a very angry Marine. I touched the scar on my chin, hidden under the makeup. "Come and get it, son," I whispered. I disappeared into the darkness of the house, ready to turn his fake robbery into a very real nightmare. I sat in the darkness of the guest bedroom, listening to the house settle. My phone screen cast a dim glow on my face as I checked the camera feeds one last time. The camera I had installed in the hallway showed Braden moving back and forth between the master bathroom and the linen closet. He was carrying bottles, large industrial-sized bottles of liquid soap and body oil. He was not being subtle. He was desperate. Desperation makes men sloppy, but it also makes them dangerous. He wasn't planning a complex assassination. He was planning a slip and fall. It was the oldest trick in the book for getting rid of the elderly. A wet floor, a marble tile, and gravity. The medical examiner would call it an accident. The insurance company would pay out. And Braden would be $5 million richer by morning. I turned off the phone and slipped it into my pocket. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small plastic packet I had prepared earlier. It was filled with a mixture of corn syrup and red food coloring, simple, effective, and horrifyingly realistic under bathroom lighting. I tucked it into the collar of my shirt right behind my ear. I stood up. My knees popped. I wasn't just walking into a trap. I was walking onto a stage, and I had to give the performance of a lifetime. I opened the door and shuffled into the hallway. I made sure my cane tapped loudly against the floorboards. I wanted him to know I was coming. I wanted him to be ready. Braden emerged from the master bedroom. He was wearing a plush white bathrobe, looking every inch the concerned son-in-law. His hair was wet as if he had just showered. "Leo," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I was just looking for you. I drew you a bath. A nice hot bath with Epsom salts. It will help with your joint pain. You looked so stiff earlier." I looked at him. His eyes were wide and innocent, but his hands were trembling slightly. He was terrified. Not of me, but of what he was about to do. He was about to cross a line from which there was no return. "Thank you, Braden," I mumbled, slurring my words slightly. "That sounds nice. I ache all over." I let him guide me toward the master bathroom. The door was open. Steam billowed out, carrying the scent of lavender and eucalyptus. It looked inviting. But as we got closer, I saw the sheen on the floor. The marble tiles near the tub were glistening. He had coated them in a thick layer of oil and soap. It was practically invisible in the steam, but to a trained eye, it stood out like a landmine. If a frail, 68-year-old man stepped on that, he wouldn't just slip. He would shatter. His hip would break, his head would crack against the porcelain tub. It would be a violent, fatal fall. Braden stopped at the doorway. "I will go get you a fresh towel," he said, backing away. "Go ahead, and Leo. Relax." He disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with the trap. I took a deep breath. This was it. I stepped into the bathroom, closing the door halfway, but leaving it ajar so the camera in the bedroom could see through the gap. I moved toward the tub, avoiding the slick zone with careful, precise steps. I looked at the marble edge of the bathtub. That was the impact point. I had learned how to fall in the Marines. Tuck the chin, protect the head roll with the impact. But tonight, I couldn't protect myself too much. It had to look real. It had to sound real. I positioned myself. I gripped the edge of the sink for stability. Then I let go. I threw my weight backward violently. I slapped the floor hard with my open hand to create the sound of a body hitting stone, a sickening meat-on-bone thud that echoed off the tiled walls. At the same time, I crushed the blood packet behind my ear. I screamed. A short, sharp cry of pain that was cut off abruptly, as if the wind had been knocked out of me. Then I lay still. I sprawled across the floor, my head resting inches from the corner of the tub. The red syrup oozed from my hair, pooling darkly on the white marble. My eyes were closed. I held my breath. I slowed my heart rate, forcing my body into a state of total stillness. Silence. The bathroom was silent except for the soft gurgle of the water in the tub. I waited. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They weren't hurried. They weren't the running footsteps of a man coming to save his father-in-law. They were slow, deliberate. Braden appeared in the doorway. I watched him through the narrow slit of my eyelids. He stood there freezing in the entrance. He was staring at my body. He was staring at the blood spreading across the floor. Any normal human being would have rushed to my side. They would have shouted my name. They would have fumbled for a phone to call 911. Braden did none of those things. He took a step inside. He carefully avoided the oil patch, stepping over it, with a grace that proved he knew exactly where it was. He walked up to me and stood over my body. "Leo," he whispered. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. He bent down. I felt his hand hover over my neck. He was checking for a pulse, but his hand was shaking so badly, he couldn't find it. Or maybe he didn't want to find it. He pulled his hand away after a split second. He stood up straight, and then he did something that chilled me to the bone. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a rictus of relief, a grotesque baring of teeth. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long, shaky breath. Finally, he said softly to the empty room, finally. He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out his phone. I thought for a second he might call an ambulance, that maybe a shred of humanity remained. But he didn't dial 911. He opened the camera app. I heard the soft electronic shutter sound. Click, click. He was taking photos, photos of my corpse. Photos to send to the Petrovic syndicate to prove that the job was done. Photos to secure his $5 million freedom. He put the phone away. He looked down at me one last time. His face hardened. The fear was gone, replaced by pure arrogance. "You should have just signed the papers, old man," he sneered. Then he drew his foot back. He kicked me. It wasn't a gentle nudge. He drove the toe of his slipper hard into my ribs. It hurt. It genuinely hurt. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from grunting. He wanted to make sure I wasn't faking. He wanted to inflict one last indignity on the man he thought he had conquered. "Goodbye, Leo," he said. He turned and walked out of the bathroom. I heard him walking down the hallway. I heard him go into the kitchen. I heard the sound of a glass cabinet opening and the clink of a bottle. He was pouring himself a drink. He was celebrating. He was going to wait. He would let me lie here and bleed out for 20 minutes, maybe 30, just to be sure. Then he would call the police and perform his grieving son act. He would cry, he would say he found me like this, that I must have slipped. I opened my eyes. The blood was sticky on my neck. My ribs throbbed where he had kicked me, but inside I felt nothing but cold resolve. I sat up slowly, wiping the corn syrup from my face. I looked directly at the hidden camera I had installed in the vent above the door. I knew Saul was watching. I knew everything: the trap, the smile, the photos, the kick had been recorded in high-definition cloud storage. Braden Cole wasn't just a thief anymore. He wasn't just a fraud. He was a murderer in his heart, and the law would see him as one. I stood up. I was stiff and covered in sticky red goo, but I felt stronger than I had in years. I walked to the sink and washed my face. I watched the red water swirl down the drain. It looked like I was washing away the last of my mercy. I wasn't going to wait for him to call the police. I wasn't going to let him control the narrative for one more second. I dried my face. I checked my appearance in the mirror. I looked like a nightmare. A revenant returned from the grave. Perfect. I walked out of the bathroom. I didn't head for the front door. I headed for the kitchen. Braden was standing by the island bench nursing a large glass of scotch. He had his back to me, looking out at the dark garden. He was humming a tune. He was happy. I stopped in the doorway. I gripped the doorframe with my blood-stained hands. I didn't shout. I just spoke in my normal voice. Vince's voice. That was a mistake, Braden. Braden froze. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound was deafening in the quiet house. He turned around slowly. His face went from flushed to ghostly pale in a heartbeat. He looked at me standing there, covered in blood, but upright alive, and looking at him with the eyes of a wolf. "You," he stammered. "You are dead." "I saw you." I took a step forward. I didn't limp. "You saw what you wanted to see," I said. "You saw an old man dying. But you didn't check the pulse, Braden. You never checked the details. That is why you are a failure." He backed away until his back hit the refrigerator. How are you standing?" I smiled. It was the same cold smile I had given him in the bedroom the night before. "Because I am not Leo," I whispered. Braden's eyes darted to the knife block on the counter. He was thinking about it. He was thinking about finishing the job properly this time. "Don't," I said. "Don't even think about it. The police are already on their way." My lawyer saw everything. The camera in the bathroom saw everything. The kick, the smile, the photos. It is over. Braden looked up at the vent where the camera was hidden. The realization crashed down on him. The trap wasn't for me. It was for him. And he had walked right into it. He slumped against the fridge, sliding down until he hit the floor amidst the broken glass and spilled scotch. He put his head in his hands. "No," he moaned. "No, no, no." I walked over to him. I loomed over him, casting a long shadow. "You have 10 minutes before the sirens start." "Braden," I said, "enjoy your drink. It is the last good one you are going to have for 20 years. I turned and walked away, leaving him shivering on the kitchen floor. The corpse had walked, and the reckoning had arrived. The ambulance ride away from the estate was the most relaxing part of my week. I had called the paramedics myself immediately after leaving Braden shivering on the kitchen floor. I told the dispatcher that I was an elderly man suffering from confusion and chest pains. It was a tactical extraction. I needed to get out of that house safely, and I needed a documented medical reason for Leo's absence at the gala tonight, until the moment we chose to strike. As the siren wailed, cutting through the night air, I lay on the stretcher and smiled. Braden wouldn't follow me. He was too busy drowning his terror in scotch and trying to figure out how to spin this to his advantage. When we arrived at the hospital, I signed myself out against medical advice the moment the EMTs turned their backs. I walked 3 blocks to a diner where a black van was waiting. The sliding door opened, revealing 4 faces that looked like they had been carved out of granite. My squad. There was Gunner, a former artillery specialist, who sat in a wheelchair but had arms the size of tree trunks. There was Tex, a sniper who had lost an eye, but none of his aim. There was Doc, who had patched me up in Da Nang more times than I could count, and driving the van was Big Mike, a man who spoke 5 words a year and frightened everyone he met. We drove in silence to the Safe House, a small motel near the airport where I had stashed Leo. The reunion was not emotional. It was operational. I opened the motel room door. Leo was sitting on the edge of the bed staring at the wall. He was wearing my old flannel shirt and jeans, looking uncomfortable in the rough fabric. When he saw me, he stood up. His eyes scanned my face, looking for the bruises I had inflicted on his tormentor. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Phase 1 is done," I said, walking over to the ice bucket. I poured myself a drink. "Braden thinks you are having a psychotic break. He thinks I am a ghost. He is confused, terrified, and desperate, which means he is going to be sloppy." I opened the garment bag I had brought with me. Inside was a tuxedo. Not just any tuxedo. It was a bespoke midnight blue suit that Leo had bought for his acceptance speech at the Entrepreneur of the Year Awards 5 years ago. It was the armor of a king. "Put it on," I ordered. Leo looked at the suit, then at me. "I can't, Vince. I can't go there tonight. I can't face him. He pushed me down the stairs. He will kill me." "He won't kill you," I said, my voice hard. "Because he won't be looking at you. He will be looking at us." I stepped aside and the 4 veterans walked into the small room. The air instantly felt heavier. These were men who had seen the worst of humanity and survived. They radiated a dangerous calm. Leo looked at them, his eyes wide. "These men are your security detail tonight," I explained. "Big Mike is going to push my wheelchair. You are going to walk in 10 minutes after we make our entrance. You are going to walk in with the police." Leo swallowed hard. "The police?" I pulled out my phone. I showed him the video of Braden in the bathroom smiling at my dead body, the video of the kick, the audio of the phone call to the mob. "Saul has already sent this to the district attorney," I said. "The warrant is being typed up as we speak, but the police promised to give us a 10-minute head start. They know we have history with this guy. They know we deserve a moment of closure." Leo touched the screen, watching the man he had treated like a son kick his body. I saw something change in my brother's eyes. The fear didn't vanish, but it hardened. It turned into something useful. It turned into resolve. He reached out and took the tuxedo. "I will be ready," he whispered. "Good." I left Leo to dress and got into the van with the boys. We had one stop to make before the party. We needed to get into position. The gala was being held at the Grand Sterling Hotel in the main ballroom. It was neutral ground, but tonight it would become a kill box. Meanwhile, across town, Braden Cole was trying to convince himself that he had won. I could imagine him in the master bedroom of the estate, standing in front of the full-length mirror. He would be smoothing down the lapels of his white dinner jacket. He would be checking his teeth. He would be telling himself that the hallucination in the kitchen was just stress, just the alcohol playing tricks on a tired mind. After all, he had seen the ambulance take me away. He had seen the lights. In his mind, the problem was solved. The old man was in the hospital, probably sedated. The ghost in the kitchen was just a flicker of guilt that he could easily suppress with enough money and applause. He would be thinking about the speech he was going to give. The speech about how his beloved father-in-law had tragically taken a turn for the worse and had handed over the reins of the company with his blessing. He would ask for a moment of silence. He would look sad, and then he would announce the new direction of Moretti Holdings, a direction that led straight into the pockets of the Petrovic syndicate. He was probably feeling invincible right now. The high of surviving the bathroom incident, combined with the relief of my departure, would be intoxicating. He would feel like he had cheated fate. But fate doesn't like to be cheated. And fate was currently sitting in a black van, checking a Sig Sauer pistol. Pistol just in case. We arrived at the hotel service entrance at 7:30. Big Mike flashed a badge that wasn't strictly legal anymore, and the security guard waved us through. We took the freight elevator up to the mezzanine level. From up here, I could see the ballroom. It was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers dripping with light tables covered in white silk waiters moving like synchronized swimmers. And there, in the center of it all, was Braden. He was working the room. He had a glass of champagne in one hand, and he was shaking hands with the other. He looked radiant. He was laughing, throwing his head back at jokes that weren't funny. He was charming the board members, touching elbows, kissing cheeks. He was the perfect picture of a successful successor. Mallory was there too. She was wearing a red dress that looked like a wound against her pale skin. She stood by his side, a silent statue. She wasn't drinking. She looked terrified. Her eyes kept darting to the door as if she expected the police or a ghost to walk in. She knew. She knew what he was capable of, and her silence was eating her alive. I signaled to Big Mike. He unfolded the wheelchair we had brought. I sat down. Gunnar pulled out a roll of bandages and began wrapping my head. We needed to sell the injury. We needed the visual impact. Down below, Braden tapped a spoon against his champagne glass. The sharp ring cut through the chatter. The room went silent. 500 faces turned toward him. "Thank you, everyone," he said, his voice smooth and confident, projected by the microphone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Tonight is a celebration of legacy, but it is also a night of transition. As many of you know, my father-in-law, Leo Moretti, has been struggling with his health." A murmur of sympathy went through the crowd. Braden lowered his head, perfecting the grieving son act. "It breaks my heart to say this, but Leo was hospitalized this evening. His mind, his brilliant mind, is not what it used to be." I gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. The rage was a cold knot in my stomach. He was burying a living man with lies. But Braden continued, looking up with a brave smile. Before he was taken away, he made his wishes clear. He wanted the company to move forward. He wanted strength, and he asked me to lead us into that future. Applause. Polite ripples of clapping that grew louder as the sycophants joined in. Braden soaked it up. He closed his eyes, basking in the adoration. He had done it. He had lied his way to the top. In the shadows of the mezzanine, I pulled out a burner phone. I had Braden's number dialed. I had the text message written. It was time to pop his bubble. I pressed send. Down on the stage, Braden was raising his glass for a toast. "To the future," he bellowed. His phone buzzed in his breast pocket. It was a violent vibration against his heart. Usually a speaker ignores their phone during a speech, but Braden was waiting for a confirmation. He was waiting for the bank transfer notification or a message from the mob saying the debt was cleared. He couldn't resist. He lowered his glass slightly. He pulled the phone out with his left hand, keeping the smile plastered on his face. He glanced at the screen. I watched him from 20 feet above. I saw the exact moment his world ended. The smile didn't just fade, it slid off his face like wet paint. His eyes went wide. His hand started to shake so violently that the champagne in his other hand sloshed over the rim. The text message was simple. "I know what you did last night. Look up." Braden stared at the screen. Then, slowly terrified, he raised his head. He looked past the crowd. He looked past the lights. He looked up to the darkness of the mezzanine balcony. I was waiting. I leaned forward into the light, just enough for him to see me. I wasn't wearing the bandages yet. I was wearing the face of the man he thought he had killed. I raised my hand and pointed a finger directly at him. It was the same gesture a judge uses when passing a death sentence. Braden dropped his glass. It shattered on the stage, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. He took a step back, tripping over his own feet. He knocked over the microphone stand. The feedback screeched through the speakers, making everyone cover their ears. "He is here!" he screamed, pointing at the empty balcony where I had just stepped back into the shadows. "He is here! The dead man is here!" The crowd gasped. Whispers erupted. People looked around, confused. They saw a man having a breakdown. They saw guilt manifesting in real time. I nodded to Big Mike. "Wrap me up," I said. "It is showtime." Braden was down there hyperventilating, shouting at ghosts. Mallory was crying. The board members were backing away. The trap was sprung. The wolf was in the fold. And the sheep were about to find out that their shepherd was the butcher all along. The ballroom of the Grand Sterling Hotel was a sea of black ties and designer gowns, a bubble of wealth that felt suffocatingly detached from reality. From my vantage point in the shadows of the mezzanine, I watched the chaos I had ignited unfold with cold satisfaction. Braden stood alone on the stage, his finger still pointing at the empty spot on the balcony where I had momentarily revealed myself. His chest was heaving, his face slick with sweat. The microphone fed back with a high-pitched squeal that made the 500 guests wince, but Braden didn't seem to notice. He looked like a cornered rat, frantically scanning the darkness for the cat that had come to play. "He is here!" Braden screamed again, his voice cracking. "He is in the building! Security, find him!" The crowd murmured a low rumble of confusion and unease. They glanced at each other, whispering behind gloved hands. To them, Braden wasn't a man identifying a threat. He was a man having a mental breakdown in the middle of a coronation. Mallory stood frozen by the podium, her face ashen, staring at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. She took a half step toward him, reaching out a trembling hand. "Braden, please," she whispered, her voice picked up by the microphone. "You need to sit down. You are not well." Braden swatted her hand away with a violence that made the front row gasp. "Don't touch me. He is trying to trick me. He is trying to make me look crazy." I signaled to Big Mike, who was standing behind my wheelchair. It was time to escalate. We didn't just want him confused. We wanted him destroyed. I tapped the earpiece I was wearing, connecting me to Saul, who was sitting in a surveillance van in the parking lot. "Play the tape, Saul," I said softly. "Burn it down." On the massive LED screen behind the stage, the logo of Moretti Holdings flickered and vanished. The image cut to static for a split second before resolving into a crystal-clear, high-definition video feed. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. It was the interior of the master bathroom at the estate. The timestamp in the corner read 7:15 p.m. Today. The guests watched in horrified silence as they saw Braden Cole, their host, the man who had just preached about family values, standing over the prone body of an elderly man. They saw the blood pooling on the white marble. They saw Braden check for a pulse, and then they saw the smile. It was magnified on the 20-foot screen, a grotesque expression of relief and triumph that was impossible to misinterpret. The ballroom went deathly quiet. The only sound was the clinking of silverware and the heavy breathing of the man on stage who had just realized his soul was being bared to the world. Braden turned slowly to look at the screen behind him. His knees buckled. He stumbled backward, gripping the podium for support, his knuckles turning white. "No," he moaned. That is deepfake, that is AI. It is not real," but the video continued. The audience watched as Braden took out his phone and snapped photos of the body. They watched as he drew his foot back and kicked the defenseless man in the ribs. A woman in the front row screamed. Several board members stood up, knocking over their chairs. The illusion of the grieving son-in-law had not just cracked it, had shattered into a million jagged pieces. Then the audio changed. The video faded, and a waveform appeared on the screen, accompanied by a recording. It was the phone call from the study. The voice of the Russian mobster filled the room, cold and menacing, followed by Braden's desperate plea. "The old man is going to have an accident. A robbery. I will have the insurance payout by morning. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Braden wasn't just a bad son-in-law. He was a murderer for hire. He had sold his family to pay a gambling debt. Mallory covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Braden not with fear anymore, but with revulsion. She backed away from him, stepping off the stage as if his very presence was contagious. "It is a lie," Braden shrieked, his voice tearing at his throat. He looked out at the sea of judging faces. "You have to believe me, Leo is senile. He staged this. He is the one who is crazy." That was my cue. I nodded to Big Mike. He pushed the wheelchair forward out of the shadows and toward the freight elevator. We descended to the ballroom floor in silence. When the doors opened, all eyes turned to us. I was wrapped in bandages, my head swathed in white gauze, my arm in a sling. I looked like a man who had survived a war, and in a way I had. Big Mike pushed me through the double doors at the back of the ballroom. The sound of the wheels on the parquet floor was rhythmic and ominous. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. Men in tuxedos stepped aside, bowing their heads in shame. Women clutched their pearls, their eyes wide with pity and shock. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes locked on the stage, locked on Braden. He saw me coming. He saw the ghost rolling toward him down the center aisle. He rubbed his eyes frantically, thinking I was a hallucination. But I didn't disappear. I got closer. I stopped the wheelchair 10 feet from the stage. The music had stopped. The waiters had stopped serving. The entire world seemed to have stopped to watch this confrontation. I reached up with my injured hand and slowly pulled the microphone from the stand that had been set up for questions. "Hello, Braden," I said. My voice was raspy, amplified by the speakers, so it reached every corner of the room. Braden shook his head. "You are dead. I saw you die." I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. "You saw what you wanted to see. Just like you saw a ATM machine when you looked at my brother. Just like you saw a pawn when you looked at your wife." I gestured to the screen behind him, where the image of his kick was frozen. "You forgot the first rule of combat, Braden," I continued. "Never assume the enemy is dead until you have checked the pulse yourself. And you were too afraid to touch me, weren't you? Too afraid that the blood might get on your expensive white hands." Braden looked around the room. He saw the security guards moving in. He saw the board members whispering to the police officers who had just entered the back of the room. He saw the walls closing in. He looked at Mallory. She was standing by the exit, shaking her head. She had abandoned him. He looked at the exit, blocked by Big Mike and my team of veterans. He looked at me, and then he snapped. The veneer of civilization is thin. For a man like Braden Cole, it was painted on. Underneath was a frightened animal, and animals bite when they are trapped. He let out a guttural roar of frustration. He reached into his tuxedo jacket. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a steak knife, a serrated silver knife he must have swiped from a table during his panic. "Stay back!" he screamed, brandishing the knife at the crowd. The guests closest to the stage scrambled backward, overturning tables and spilling drinks in their haste to get away. I didn't flinch. I sat in my wheelchair, calm and collected. Braden jumped down from the stage. He landed awkwardly, but regained his balance. He waved the knife wildly, his eyes darting back and forth. "I am walking out of here," he yelled. "Anyone tries to stop me and I will cut them. I swear to God, I will cut them." He looked at me. His eyes narrowed. "You," he hissed. "This is your fault. You ruined everything. You stubborn old mule." He took a step toward me. The knife glinted under the chandelier light. I didn't move. I didn't call for help. I just watched him come. Big Mike took a step forward, but I held up a hand to stop him. This was personal. This was between me and the monster who had bruised my brother. Braden laughed a manic sound. "Look at you. You can't even stand up. You think you are so smart with your cameras and your videos, but right now it is just me and you and a knife." He lunged. He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and madness. He closed the distance in 2 strides, raising the knife to strike. He wasn't aiming to wound. He was aiming for my chest. He wanted to silence the witness. He wanted to finish what he started in the bathroom. The crowd screamed. But Braden had made one fatal mistake. He thought I was Leo. He thought I was a cripple in a wheelchair. He had forgotten who was really sitting in that chair. As the knife came down, I didn't cower. I didn't scream, I moved. And when I moved, I didn't move like an old man. I moved like a Marine. This was the moment, the payoff, the final lesson, and class was officially in session. Braden Cole moved with the desperate speed of a man who saw his life ending. The steak knife was aimed at my chest, a silver flash under the ballroom lights. He screamed as he lunged, a sound that was half rage and half terror. To the 500 guests watching in horror, it looked like murder in slow motion. An able-bodied man attacking a cripple in a wheelchair. But I was not a cripple, and I was done playing the victim. As the blade came down, I didn't roll the wheelchair backward. I leaned into the attack. My left hand shot up, not to block, but to intercept. I caught his wrist in midair. The sound of flesh slapping against flesh cracked through the silent room. Braden froze. His momentum stopped dead. He looked down at his wrist, then at my face. He expected to feel the weak, trembling grip of an old man with heart failure. Instead, he felt the vice-like crush of a hand that had dug trenches and carried wounded men through fire. I squeezed. I dug my thumb into the pressure point on the inside of his forearm, a technique designed to force an enemy to drop a weapon. Braden's eyes bulged. He let out a gasp of shock. His fingers spasmed involuntarily, and the steak knife clattered harmlessly onto the parquet floor. "I didn't let go. I am not Leo," I whispered loud enough only for him to hear. Then I stood up. I didn't struggle to my feet. I rose with smooth, powerful kinetic energy, shedding the blanket from my lap. The bandages on my head, the sling on my arm, they were just props in a play that was now over. I towered over him. At 6'2", with my back straight and my shoulders squared, I was a wall of muscle and scar tissue. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. They were witnessing a miracle or a nightmare. The invalid had just become a giant. Braden stumbled back, his wrist still trapped in my iron grip. He looked up at me, his face draining of all color. He looked like a child who had woken a sleeping dragon. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice trembling. "I am the consequences of your actions, Braden," I said. I twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to bend forward. He yelped in pain. I could have broken his arm right there. I could have snapped it like a dry twig. But that was too easy. He needed to feel the full weight of his mistake. "You like to hit old men," I growled. "You like to kick them when they are down. You like to poison them. Let's see how you handle a fair fight." I released his arm and shoved him backward. He stumbled, arms flailing, but managed to stay on his feet. He looked around wildly. The exit was blocked by Big Mike and my squad. The police were closing in from the sides. He had nowhere to run. He looked at me, and for a second I saw the madness return to his eyes. He raised his fists. He was going to try. He actually thought he could fight his way out. "Come on!" he screamed, bouncing on his toes like a boxer. "Come on, old man," I shook my head. "You have no idea what you just asked for." I took one step forward. He threw a wild, desperate haymaker aimed at my jaw. It was slow, telegraphed, pathetic. I didn't even slip it. I just stepped inside his guard. My right hand formed a fist. Not a loose, angry fist, but a tight, compact hammer. I channeled 40 years of discipline, 40 years of anger, and the memory of every bruise on my brother's face into one motion. I drove my fist into his solar plexus. It wasn't a showy punch to the face. It was a body shot. A punch designed to shut down the central nervous system. The sound was sickening. A wet thud that echoed to the back of the room. Braden's eyes rolled back in his head. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. All the air left his lungs in a rush. He folded in half, crumpling like a cheap suit. He hit the floor face first, gasping, wheezing, clutching his stomach as his body tried to remember how to breathe. I stood over him. I didn't touch him again. I didn't need to. He was broken. Stay down, I said. The spell broke. The room erupted. Police officers swarmed the stage, guns drawn. They didn't aim at me. They aimed at the man writhing on the floor. 2 officers grabbed Braden, hauling him to his feet. He was still gasping, drool running down his chin. He looked at the handcuffs clicking onto his wrists with utter disbelief. "No," he wheezed. "No. The mob. You can't arrest me. They will kill me. You have to protect me." He was crying now. The arrogant CEO, the abuser, the tough guy, was begging the police to save him from his own debts. I turned away. I was done with him. I looked toward the back of the room. The double doors opened again. Leo walked in. He was wearing the tuxedo I had brought him. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but his head was held high. He looked at the chaos, at the police dragging his son-in-law away, at the stunned crowd. Then he looked at me. He walked down the aisle. The crowd parted for him again, but this time there was no pity in their eyes. There was awe. They looked from me to him, realizing the trick. The twins. The switch. Leo stopped in front of me. He looked at Braden, who was being shoved into the back of a squad car, visible through the open doors. "Leo," Braden screamed, twisting his head back. "Leo! Tell them it was a mistake. I'm family." Leo didn't flinch. He walked up to the car. He looked Braden in the eye. "You are not family," Leo said softly. His voice was steady. "Family doesn't poison family. Family doesn't steal." Braden screamed again as the door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. Mallory ran up to us. Her mascara was smeared, her red dress looking garish under the flashing police lights. She grabbed Leo's arm. Dad, I didn't know. You have to believe me. I was scared." "He made me do it." Leo looked at his daughter. He gently removed her hand from his arm. "You knew, Mallory," he said. "You watched him pour wine on me. You watched him humiliate me. You chose your comfort over my life." "But Dad," she sobbed. "I'm cutting you off, Mallory," Leo said. "The trust fund is frozen. The credit cards are canceled. You are 32 years old. It is time you learned to survive on your own." He turned his back on her. Mallory stood there alone in the middle of the ballroom as her world collapsed around her. She had gambled on the wrong man, and she had lost everything. I put my hand on Leo's shoulder. "Let's go home, brother," I said. We walked out of the hotel together. 2 old men, identical in face but different in spirit, united by a bond that no amount of money or violence could break. 1 month later. I sat on the edge of the dock at the lake house, casting a line into the quiet water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you only appreciate after a war. Leo sat next to me. He looked better. The bruises were gone. He had gained weight. He wasn't taking the fake heart pills anymore, and his color had returned. He looked 10 years younger. "Did you hear about Braden?" Leo asked, watching his bobber float on the water. I nodded. Hard to miss it. It was all over the news. Braden was in a maximum security prison, awaiting trial for attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. But prison was the least of his worries. The Petrovic syndicate didn't forgive debts. Word on the street was that Braden had been moved to protective custody after an accident in the showers left him with 2 broken legs. He was living in a 6x8 cell, terrified of his own shadow. knowing that the moment he stepped into the general population, his time was up. He was living in a cage of his own making. And Mallory, I asked. She is working as a hostess at a diner in the city, Leo said. She called me yesterday. She sounded humble, for the first time in her life. She asked if she could come visit. Not for money. Just to talk. What did you say? I told her she could come, Leo said. But she has to take the bus. I laughed. A deep belly laugh that scared a duck off the water. Good for you, Leo. Good for you. We sat in silence for a while, just watching the water. You saved my life, Vince, Leo said quietly. Not just from Braden. You saved me from myself. I was so afraid of being alone that I let them treat me like garbage. You taught me that being alone is better than being with people who hurt you. I reeled in my line. I didn't save you, Leo. I just reminded you who you are. You're a Moretti. We don't break. We might bend, we might get bruised, but we don't break. I looked at my brother. He wasn't the weak, trembling man I had met in the parking lot of the VA hospital anymore. He was strong. He was in control. He had taken his company back, fired the board members who had enabled Braden, and started a foundation for elder abuse victims. He had turned his pain into power. I packed up my tackle box. The sun had dipped below the horizon. I am going back to the VA tomorrow, I said. Leo looked at me. You don't have to. You can stay here. Half the house is yours. Half the company is yours if you want it. I smiled. I know, Leo, and I appreciate it. But I like my simple life. I like my routine. And besides, I stood up and patted him on the back. Someone has to keep those young nurses on their toes. Leo laughed. He stood up and hugged me. A real hug this time, strong and assured. Thank you, brother, he said. Anytime, I replied. I walked up the dock toward the house, my cane tapping a rhythm on the wood. I wasn't Vince, the crazy veteran, anymore. I wasn't just a number in a system. I was a brother. I was a protector. And most importantly, I was the man who taught a monster that you never ever mess with family. My name is Vince Moretti. I am 68 years old. And if you think I'm too old to fight, you are welcome to try me. But bring a helmet. You're going to need it. This is the end of my story. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of karma coming full circle. And remember, treat your elders with respect. You never know which one of them might be a sleeping wolf waiting for a reason to wake up. See you in the next story.